Hi there. Sorry, I just realized we didn't have any sound. Welcome, everyone. I had my sound muted, waiting to go live. So I apologize for that. Hopefully you can hear me now and we can talk. Lori Vallow was convicted 80 days ago, and the judge has sentenced her to 3 consecutive life without parole sentences. So we've got a lot to talk about. The judge did feel that the fact that these sentences were for 3 individual crimes at 3 individual times warranted, with 3 individual victims, warranted consecutive sentences. And I can't say I disagree. But we do have a lot to talk about in terms of what happened initially and what interest there was in Lori. Sorry, my phone's blowing up. I've got people talking to me about no sound, which we have fixed, and so we'll move forward. I thought what was particularly interesting was, once again, Lori was driving the bus here. Had she been less self-righteous or less in denial, I think we would have seen a slightly different outcome. Unfortunately, she doubled down, and I think that was a huge mistake. But I think her attorney saw that coming. They were clear that they understood that she is not. Was not in any way going to show any kind of remorse. So we started out, for those who may not have been able to follow the whole thing this morning, we started out with the prosecution presenting some really moving victim impact statements. There were victim impact statements from Lori's sisters, Samantha Gwilliam, her aunt, Vicki Holbein, Holben, I think it is, and as well as a victim impact statement, a moving victim impact statement from Kay Woodcock, and a letter or a statement that was read by Rob Wood for Colby Ryan. And throughout the whole thing, the state was asking for life without parole. John Thomas got up, and his statement was interesting, but I thought a little hollow. He, knowing that Lori would not ever admit any remorse, he sort of appealed to people asking for life without parole or life with the possibility of parole after 20 years. He then said some things. He said darkness cannot drive out darkness. But that was not something that Lori and Chad ascribed to when they were trying to drive out darkness from the people who they perceived as dark spirits. He said we need peace to replace hurt, and that Lori's very misunderstood, and that her motto is love is the key. He made the point that without some incentive for Lori to do well in prison, there was no hope for her. And they asked for a possibility of parole after 20 years. As you all know, I predicted that the court was going to give her a fixed period of some period of years and then allow a possibility of parole. I still think that would have been true had Lori not made a statement, but Lori did make a statement. And that statement, in that statement, it was clear that Lori is still firmly in her delusions. And the judge made a comment about that. She started out by quoting the Bible, talking about who among you can judge. Those who are without sin should throw the first stone, and that the judgment alone belongs to Jesus. She then said, Jesus knows me, and I mourn with all of you. She then said, no one was murdered, that there were accidental deaths, that suicides happened, and that deaths happened as a result of medication. So it appears from what was presented in court and some of the cross-examination that she was claiming that Tammy Daybell's death was a result of some sort of medication interaction, that JJ's death was accidental, and that Tylee committed suicide because of her long chronic pain issues. I think those are all incredible stretches considering the evidence that we all saw presented at court. She then revealed a never before discussed near-death experience, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. As we know, Chad Daybell claimed that he had had 2 near-death experiences, and that as a result, he could pierce the veil, he could talk to his dead relatives, he could talk to other people who were on the other side of the veil in heaven, and that they frequently gave him visions of the future. For the first time, we heard that Lori Vallow claims that she nearly died when Tylee was being born, and that she has had this near-death experience. As a result, Lori now says she had access to heaven, that the spirit world, that she had access to heaven, and that she has contact with her children in the spirit world. She said, I know my children are happy and busy in the spirit world. And she called Tammy Daybell her eternal friend. She said, I'm homesick for heaven every day. I don't fear death. I didn't want to leave heaven. Tylee has visited me. She claimed that Tylee suffered horrible physical pain her whole life, that her body was never right, and that she's no longer in pain, and she suffered pain from the alleged sex abuse imposed on her by her father, Joe Ryan. I want to point out that in everything we know, that the alleged sexual abuse of Tylee has never been corroborated. And in fact, during the time when those allegations were made, Tylee's guardians ad litem and evaluators all said they did not believe that abuse had happened. Now, Colby Ryan, Lori's son, has made similar allegations against Joe Ryan, and I will never disqualify or in any way diminish any victim's truth and their allegations. We simply don't know what the answer was to that. Lori claimed that JJ visited her. He comforted her. He was an adult spirit. And although his life was short, it was meaningful. And he assured her that she didn't do anything wrong. She said, I look forward to that she said that she believed that all of her, somebody said they just lost the sound. So if you are without sound, please let me know. Lori said that she believed that Okay. Lori said that she believed that that Tylee, JJ, and Tammy were all in the arms of Jesus, and she was looking forward to the day that she is in the arms of my Jesus, as she said. It was also pointed out early when the prosecution was giving their statement that thank you for letting me know you have sound. The prosecution pointed out, and the judge noted, that at all turns, Lori refused to cooperate with the pre-sentence investigation. I think this was probably the single issue that tipped the judge over for life without parole. Had Lori participated in those screenings and in that process, because it is an in-depth process, you heard the judge say that there were 400, that the pre-sentence report, in spite of the fact without her participation, was somewhere around 400 pages. So it was lengthy, that was in depth. As I told you before, this is the equivalent of the mitigation phase in a death penalty case. So specialists are digging into Lori's background, her life, in an effort to give the judge the widest variety, or the widest net being cast about Lori and the possibility of any kind of mitigation. So Lori really did undermine herself by not participating in that process. She made the choice not to participate. She also made the choice in making a choice not to participate. It also tied the hands of her lawyers, who provided the mitigation folks, the pre-sentence investigation folks, with 600 pages of her mental health records. Because Lori refused to participate in any of the screenings and any of the evaluation having to do with her mental health, the judge did not allow that to be included in the pre-sentence recommendations. So only 27 pages of her mental health diagnosis was provided. Even at that, the judge noted that she has mental health problems, that she has been diagnosed with both a delusional disorder and personality disorder. However, I think the judge was precluded from using any of that information because Lori didn't participate, and it was very clear from the beginning that Lori did not want that considered. So we are left with the question of how much her delusions have played into, from the very beginning, her approach to this case. And we're left with the constant question of, when does religious fervor become religious delusion? We've been asking that question since the very beginning. I really think that had Lori's attorneys been able to convince her that she needed at this point to really throw herself on the mercy of the court, to participate in the pre-sentence investigation, to allow both the pre-sentence investigators and the court to consider her mental health, we would have had a different outcome. But to be honest, Lori's statement clearly doubled down on all of the things that she has said. And I think most significantly, the judge really took to heart the fact that she did not show any remorse. Now, y'all know I am not a Judge Boyce fan personally, but I am always going to give credit where credit is due. I thought he was thoughtful. I thought he made a very careful review of the statutes and the case law. And I thought that he very clearly outlined his thought process and his findings. He did a good job at this. So you're never going to hear me say Judge Boyce did not do a good job. I'm going to say that as this case went along, I think he matured. I think that he approached the case with some good judicial temperament. I think that he operated the trial responsibly. And I think that he gave some very good, thoughtful discussion today about his reasoning. So you are not ever going to find this lawyer not giving credit where credit is due. He had a hard job, and I think that he acquitted himself well, both at the trial and at this sentencing. What I think of him personally is a completely different kettle of fish. But he did his job. He was professional, and I thought that he did a very good job of sorting through his thought process. And I think that is one of the most significant things that a judge can do under these circumstances, because it's important for both the players in the case, the defense, the prosecution, the defendant, the jurors, to all understand, as well as the public, to understand his thought process as he's parsing through each piece of this process of sentencing. So he went through all of the mitigating factors, and then he went through the aggravating factors, and he said there's so many of them. I think he was, and I think rightfully so, took a moment to say, you came to my small community with the intent to murder your children, to rid yourself of that responsibility. And he pointed out you had so many other options. I thought that it was moving of him to say there were many, many people within this community who would have taken your children in a moment. He pointed out that there were people within her family who would have taken the children, and that there was absolutely no reason for her to do what she did, that there were alternatives, but that to her, because they were in the way and there was only one way for her to profit, she made this choice. He pointed out that Lori showed no remorse for the people who spent a long time looking for the children, and that she had no remorse for the people who were forced to view these horrible, horrific crime scene photos. He was quick to point out that no one will ever be able to unsee those photos, not the family, not law enforcement, not the prosecution or the defense. The images of those crime scenes and those bodies will be with the people who saw them forever. Over my career, I have seen some pretty disturbing photos, and I am here to tell you that they are never gone from your memory. And I feel for the families who were forced to see for their last memories of their loved ones to be those photos. The victim impact statement that Kay Woodcock gave was incredibly moving, and I was so happy to hear her really have the opportunity to finally say her piece and finally summarize the feelings of the Vallow family, and to some extent, I think, the Cox family as well. I was sad to hear that for the first time, we heard a little bit of insight into how Chad's children are dealing with what has happened. And I was very sad to hear that they did not attend their grandmother's funeral, and that there continues to be a rift between Chad's children and the rest of Chad's family, and particularly a rift between Tammy's family as well. I'm sad to hear that, because they are also victims who need support and could benefit from the support of their families on both sides. But I think that the single thing that really tipped Judge Boyce over into making the decision that he was going to sentence Lori to 3 consecutive life without parole sentences was her absolute lack of remorse. I think we're going to see a different tactic and perhaps a difference in the way that the cases are going to be presented for Chad. Now, the court did point out, and the defense also pointed out, that the court was not able to consider the co-defendant's involvement in the case, because he's still presumed innocent until proven guilty at his trial. The court also pointed out that he was not able to consider the fact that there are charges pending in Arizona, that Lori has charges pending in Arizona for other actions as well. So he was not able to consider that when he was considering the fact that she has no prior criminal history. Those of you who read my newsletter know that I predicted that the court was going to impose a lengthy fixed sentence after which Lori would be eligible for parole. I still think that that could have been possible had Lori not done what she did, and that is decline to participate in the pre-sentence investigation and then double down in a public statement. So I think that the fact that there is no possibility of parole is purely at Lori's feet. That is purely because of her activities. So let's take some questions. For those of you who were able to watch the sentencing, please let me know. I do want to make one sort of personal aside while we're collecting questions. I found, for those of you who were able to catch on Twitter and perhaps on East Idaho News show prior to the trial beginning, there were a group of people who actually started lining up outside the courthouse at 4:00 yesterday afternoon, and who spent the night in line waiting to get into the trial. I know that's not unusual based on the fact that the courtroom is very small, and that in order to get a seat in the courtroom, you had to be there early. I didn't go. Those of you who know I had hip replacement surgery, and I wasn't really sure that I was ready to go stand in line, sleep outdoors all night, and drive 6 hours on top of it. I was very troubled by the sort of circus party atmosphere outside the courtroom. That is me personally. I was very troubled by that. I felt like it was distressing to see. It almost reminded me of public hangings and the sorts of things that happened in it throughout history and in the Old West. That there was almost this circus carnival air about it. And I found that really troubling, because I don't think that we should ever approach this without gravity and without an understanding of of the seriousness of what was going on. Not only the seriousness for Lori, but the seriousness for the victims and their families and what was about to happen. I hope sincerely that John Thomas's prayers are answered and that this is the beginning of some peace and some healing for the victims, and particularly for those who are still facing, because remember, they're only halfway through. I hope that this is the beginning of some healing for them. I also said that I thought there was a possibility that once Lori was sentenced, that we might see a plea from Chad Daybell. I think that if Lori had been permitted a period of some time, parole after some period, that might have been enough to tip Chad, excuse me, to tip Chad and his counsel over into a plea. I don't know what life without the possibility of parole does for Chad. So I think it will remain to be seen. So with that, let's take some questions. I see that Michelle is starring them. So we should have some questions coming up. Hi, Trisha the trucker. Hope you're doing well in Wichita, Kansas. And then off to somewhere else, but she doesn't know where yet. It's always good to see Trisha. She checks in with us as she is out across the country. And she says, hi from Wichita. Lori was found indigent and can only work in the prison. How can she pay all the restitution? Will it come from her prison pay? Yep. There is no question that in this case, because Lori has no assets and no ability to pay the restitution, it's symbolic at this point. But it is important that the court also impose those because it is also always possible. I'm going to turn my phone off because it is continuing to beep and bleep with text messages and all sorts of stuff. It is important to remember that there is some possibility, even if it's remote, that Lori could come into money. She could inherit money from somebody. She could somehow suddenly come into money. It's remote possibility, but stranger things have happened. What happens if a family member wins the lotto and then ends up leaving all of that money to Lori? So it is important for the court to impose those fines, even though they all appear to be roughly, basically symbolic at this point. So good question, Trisha. Safe travels, please. They will pay. She will be forced to pay some portion of her prison pay towards her restitution. But as we all know, prison pay is nominal. Sometimes it can be depends on the state, can be as little as $1 a day. So we'll wait to see what sort of prison job she has and if she actually is able to contribute anything to that restitution. Thanks, Trisha. Safe travels. Hi, M. Question. When she spoke today, she mentioned one of the deaths were suicide. Clearly, it's not the case, but who do I think she's referring to? I think she was referring to Tylee. I think that she believes that JJ's death somehow was an accident, that Tylee's death was suicide because of her constant pain. And as we saw during trial, there was a suggestion that there was some sort of drug interaction that caused Tammy Daybell's death. So I think that that was what she was referring to. Certainly, I don't believe that finding JJ wrapped in plastic bags, clearly having suffocated, was somehow accidental, nor do I believe that Tylee's death was suicide. But I think that was the order that she was describing. Question: if the victim's statements are submitted ahead of time and reviewed, why were there objections? Are the victims allowed to change what they wrote? Well, they are allowed to change what they wrote because the judge did ask Vicki Holbein at one point to revise her statements as she was going through them. So victim statements are extremely emotional, and victim statements are not evidence. They're not subject to any kind of cross-examination. So it's important that if the pre-sentence investigation is going to contain victim statements, that it not contain information that is inaccurate or untrue. So there were a couple of statements that one of the victims made having to do with the fact that Tammy had a pillow put over her face. There's no evidence that that happened. We can assume from the circumstantial evidence that Tammy was suffocated, that it's likely that somebody put a pillow over her face, that she had bruises on her arms as if someone sat on her while they had a pillow over her face. But there was no concrete evidence that there was a pillow over her face. So the judge struck that reference. The judge also struck another reference, which escapes me at the moment. So it was the judge saying that he did not want the pre-sentence investigation, which becomes a permanent part of the court record and will go to the appellate court on appeal, to contain any inaccurate or untrue statements. So they were stricken from the pre-sentence investigation. And that is appropriate and makes sense that they would do that. The defense objected a couple of times to a couple of Vicki's statements, and the court asked her to restate her what were some of her statements, to reform them to talk about what the impact had on the victims. So she did do that. She did sort of revise and step back and say and talk about what had happened in relation to the impact it had on the victims. So it is important that the information going into the pre-sentence investigation be accurate, because it's going to become a part of the permanent court record. Good question. If I were Lori Vallow's defense attorney, what advice would you give her at this point, insofar as you could reach her? I think that prior to the trial, I would have made an effort. Now, I'm not going to say that Jim Archibald and John Thomas didn't do this. I'm going to say what I would have done. I would have made an effort to connect with Lori so that she would have trusted me enough to follow some of my advice, including participating in the pre-sentence investigation. If I were her attorney and giving her advice now, I would advise her not to make any further statements, because her only hope now is appeals, and we wouldn't want to undermine any opportunity for her appeals. If her statement today is any indication, I think she is going to continue to make statements and talk, because I think she feels that she needs to be heard and to say her piece. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out. How common is it to object during victim impact statements? Well, I think that like closing arguments, I think that a lot of latitude is given in victim impact statements. But I think it is important for the defense to point out when there are untruths or inaccuracies in victim witness statements. Since they don't have any opportunity to cross-examine the person giving the witness statement, it is important to make sure that the facts that the witness is conveying are accurate. It is important that victims be allowed to express their feelings and to discuss the impact that the crime, got to shift a little bit in my chair thanks to my hip. I think it's important that victims be afforded the opportunity to talk about how they feel and about how the crimes have impacted them. But it is reasonable for both the defense and the prosecution to make sure that the record contains factual information and not not inaccuracies. So I hope that sort of clarifies why there were times that there were objections to those victim impact statements, because we don't want to diminish the feelings that the victims have. That's not the intent, I don't believe, of either side. And victims' rights are important. They are built into most state constitutions these days, including Idaho. And so I think it was important to sort of differentiate between the defense interrupting or in any way diminishing the feelings that the victims had from making sure that the record is accurate. These are all great questions. You know, we haven't had a lot of opportunities to talk about the way that sentencing goes and how victims are treated during sentencing. So these are good questions that we haven't really been able to dig into until now. Jen, when will she go to Arizona for that trial? That is going to be up to both Arizona and Idaho as they continue. She will likely, generally what happens when you are committed to DOC custody, the next thing that happens is that she will go to the Department of Corrections for an intake period, usually around 30 days. During that time, they go through orientation as to what to expect in prison, what the rules are, and they also go through evaluation of their own situation personally, and then where is an appropriate place for them to fit into the prison system, whether or not there are any special precautions that need to be taken, what period of time those special precautions need to be taken, as well as just some general evaluation about education level and mental health situation, whether or not the person needs medical treatment, whether there's going to be continued medical follow-up for any chronic conditions. All of those things are really determined in the first 30 days. I think that will happen before she is extradited to Arizona. And I think that there will be some determinations made about her housing within the Idaho system before she goes to Arizona. I think Arizona then will make some decisions based on today's sentencing as to how they will go forward. But I think it's really important to know that Arizona is going to treat the crimes in Arizona as discrete criminal activities that don't have anything to do with her sentence here in Idaho. The reason being is we're not going to diminish the life of Charles Vallow or the potential threat to Brandon and his family from what Lori did. So I think you're going to see the state of Arizona prosecute Lori, and I think she's going to be extradited. I think they will be filing a writ of extradition. Sorry, I'm having trouble spitting that out. Soon, and be asking for Lori to be extradited. But I don't think it will happen immediately. I think Lori's going to go through her DOC orientation and all of those things, and then Idaho and Arizona will make an agreement as to when she's going to be extradited. Good questions, everybody. Hi, Tony. I don't really see Chad going to trial now. The judge threw the book at Lori. I think he'll take a plea deal if offered. What do you think? I think that it would be wise for him to take a plea deal. He has seen all of the information that has come out of trial, and now he has seen the outcome and the judge's decision. It's a little tough right now. I think Chad and his attorneys are going to need, and the state are going to need some time to digest what happened today and to really reflect on it. I think Chad's children are going to encourage him to take a deal because I think they feel that he has liability. I think everyone feels that there is some liability that he could get the death penalty. Knowing what we know about how difficult it is to impose the death penalty these days and what a lengthy process it is, that also sort of factors into maybe what they're considering. But I think that as his children, I think his children will be encouraging him to take a deal. I do think that if the state, I think that this means that the state is likely going to say to Chad, we'll agree to what Lori got. And I don't know whether that is enough of an incentive for him to forego trial. I don't know, because, we've seen at least the evidence that was presented at trial. We don't know what additional evidence could be presented against Chad. The state has always said they felt their case was stronger against Chad than Lori. So we don't know what is still coming in his trial. But it is difficult as a defense attorney to say to your client, I think your best alternative is to take a deal for life without the possibility of parole. I think had Lori been sentenced to a fixed period and allowed the opportunity for parole, we would have seen, it would be much more likely we would have seen an immediate plea. I think now it's going to take a little time for them to digest what's happened and to be able to formulate a plan and a plea based on that. So, good questions. If she gets a new trial and is found guilty again, does her sentence change? Hey, Compassionate RN. It is possible because she would be resentenced as well. I think the likelihood that Lori is going to get a new trial is low. I think, as I have said all along, I think that the most likely basis for appeal is going to be her speedy trial issue. And I think that it is really hard for an appellate court to go back there and to try and pretend what they would have done had Lori's trial not happened and her already been sentenced. It is really hard to be able to disregard all that and to go back and to not let any of that impact their decision when the appeals court is reviewing it. As much as we like to believe that our judges are educated and wise and intentional about the way that they approach cases, they're also human, and there's always going to be in the back of their mind, but there was a trial and she was found guilty and she was sentenced and there were these statements made. And so appeals are tough. I think the only real substantial basis is going to be the speedy trial argument. I don't know whether that carries the day. But if she were granted a new trial, her sentence, she would be sentenced based on the outcome of a new trial. And it could impact her sentence indeed. Hey, Donna Rose of Sharon. Do you think she could become suicidal in light of the consecutive sentences and what she said about wishing to be with Jesus? I think that post-sentence, it is always a concern, and that the jail and the Department of Corrections should be quite concerned that she's a suicide risk for some period of time. She will be on a mental health watch, and that is standard procedure for anyone who has received a lengthy sentence. So yeah, I mean, I think that it is a potential, and I think it's a possibility in just about every case. It's really interesting. I don't know how many of you follow Mandy Matney and her Murdoch Murders podcast, which has recently rebranded itself as True Sunlight. But Eric Bland, who also is a contributor and contributes to their program called Cup of Justice, recently had a client who became a friend, who was on trial for murder, was found guilty of murder. Eric was not his attorney during that trial. He was found guilty and sentenced, and took his own life in jail. And it was incredibly sad and very disheartening for Eric. I will say that over the time that I practiced law, I never had a client who took their life after a guilty verdict, but I did have 2 clients at 2 different times take their life pre-trial. And it is never easy for an attorney to face that. It's never easy for an attorney to stand back and say, was there a chance that I could have given my client more hope? Or was there a chance that I could have been available to my client at that time when they were most desperate? So I think that is always a difficult question, and I am certain that the jail is taking every precaution to assure that she's safe as she emotionally and mentally processes what just happened. I don't ever like to lose sight of the fact. And I have said before, Brenda, I do think that Chad is going to be found guilty. I think that there is adequate information and evidence to find Chad guilty. I want to say that as a defense attorney for and as a criminal and family law attorney for almost 30 years, I never wanted to lose sight of the fact that the people who I represented were not the sum total of their actions, that they were human beings, flawed, broken, often angry, hurt, and often with bad intentions. But they were human beings who I needed to treat with as much dignity and as much compassion as I could. And I have to say that as a defense attorney, I understood John Thomas's comments today and could relate to John Thomas's comments today. I think that as a defense attorney, it was important for me to understand the people who I came in contacts with humanity, and to try and find that in the people that I represented. And to be honest, I usually was able to find that even in the worst of the people who I dealt with. That didn't mean that I wasn't honest with them, and I didn't tell them that they were going to be held accountable for their terrible behavior and their horrible choices. But it did mean that I could relate to them on a human level. And I think that that's important. And so even though some of what John Thomas said was a little bit hard to listen to, I did understand that he was talking from his heart. Other questions? Carol, will you be able to include Lori's statement in your book, or is there a copyright infringement problem? Lori's statement is public record, and so there is no copyright infringement problem. She made a public statement. It is public record, and it is out there for anyone to use. I certainly will highlight Lori's statement, and I'm not sure that I would include the entire statement, but I think that it is important that we note that she was unrepentant and that she honestly believes that everything that she did was justified and that she did not commit a crime. So we'll see. We'll see going forward what else Lori has to say. This may be the dam bursting when it comes to what Lori has to say. I think that she has a lot of pent up things that she would like to say. Will Lori be able to communicate with people who have been co-believers with her and Chad in things like multiple lives and near death, etc.? I think that's very possible. I think that as time goes along, the Department of Corrections will determine who will be able to have contact with her. But she certainly will be able to have contact with spiritual advisors. And if she believes that spiritual advisors are those people who share those beliefs, I think she will have to be able to at least have some contact with them. That's really going to be up to the Department of Corrections folks. I was really happy that Lori commented today because it showed how not sorry she was for all she'd done. Does your speaking out today give you a whole extra chapter for your book? I don't know if it gives me an extra chapter, but I have been, those of you who have been following me for a long time know that I have such a deep dive into psychology and cult behavior and a lot of other, I'm looking over here at the stack of books that I have read over the last summer and fall, waiting for this trial to happen. I also am looking at this huge stack of information and notes that I have taken from information from off the internet, and information and learned papers having from people who are professionals and experts in the area of cult and religious extremism. And I do think that as I am trying to synthesize all that information, that there are things that I heard in Lori's comments today that really resonated with some of the information that I have learned about extremist cult behavior in specifics, the specifics of some extremist cult behavior. So I'm interested in being able to synthesize that and connect up those dots with what I heard from Lori today. And I want to say that I am head down and deep into it every day, that I have tried really hard to be disciplined to write every day. I will say that I'm starting to get my energy back from my hip replacement surgery. Wednesday will be 6 weeks, so I'm feeling like I'm getting back to normal. And so I have really been, I am committed to getting that manuscript to my publisher by the end of the year. I do think that there may be, as we go forward, some information that comes out at Chad's trial that may add to that. But I really believe that we have seen the bulk of the information against Lori and Chad. And so I'll be trying to pick that information up and add it to the book as time goes on. But for now, I am diligently working, which my publisher will be really glad to hear. So Jessica, if you're watching. Hi, Lisa. Can you go over her diagnosis? Well, I'm not a psychologist, so I do not really want to dig deep into into her diagnosis. And I know that as time goes on, people are going to dig much deeper. We know that early on, it was suggested and rumored in her first evaluations that led her to health treatment for 10 months and led her to be incompetent. It was suggested that she had been diagnosed with the schizoaffective disorder, I think it's called, which is some sort of schizophrenia with depression. However, we know, having listened to a lot of different experts, that these definitions the lines between these definitions are blurred a lot. So schizoaffective disorder can have delusions. She has been diagnosed, her lawyer said, with delusional disorder. The judge said delusional disorder, along with a personality disorder. What we know is that personality disorders are not very amenable to treatment, and the older you get, the less likely it is that they can be treated. This is one of the reasons why they are not officially diagnosed until the age of 18, and why we see young people early on being more amenable to treatment than people who are less amenable to treatment as they get older. So I'm not really in a position to comment about her disorders, but I think that it is clear that someone who suffers from these strange religious delusions is going to be less amenable to treatment, because part of treatment is self-insight. We know that part of mental health treatment is being able to have some tiny modicum of insight into your mental health condition. From what I know about these two disorders, personality disorder is not really amenable to personal insight. It is a rare person with a serious personality disorder, particularly narcissistic features, as the judge pointed out, that is able to have any kind of personal insight. It is also rare for a person who has delusions, particularly religious delusions, that they earnestly believe are true, to be able to have any kind of personal insight into their own mental health condition. So these are things that are particularly stubborn and not very amenable to treatment. I don't think that you're going to see Lori, even with medication, we haven't seen her have any kind of immediate, any sort of immediate insight into what led her here. And in fact, we've seen her today really double down. If she has a mental break in prison, could she be moved to a psych facility? Yes. People receive mental health treatment in prison. However, if she were to have a complete break, if she were to have completely decompensate and have a psychotic break, it is likely that she would be sent to a secure mental health facility once again until she could be restored. The reason is that the prison is not really equipped to handle someone who is fully decompensated and in a psychotic break. So prisons are not usually equipped to handle that. Prison systems do not usually have their own discrete psych wards, but they usually have the ability to put someone into a locked, secure facility while they receive treatment. I want to thank you all and I'll get to your question in a minute. I would like to thank you all today for any of your super chats. I want to remind everybody that all of those super chats go directly to our moderator, Michelle. And I want to thank you because she is a tremendous support for our channel and deserves every dime. Hi, Shadow. How did she use different names to travel? She used the last name of Ryan when she flew to Hawaii when Tammy died. Did she access Joe Ryan's money after his death? They were already divorced when Joe died. These are good questions. I'm not sure I have entirely have answers to those. It appears that she may still have had some identification that identified her as Ryan, which she may have maintained. Identification where she didn't change her name after she married Charles Vallow. I don't know. It's not clear what we know and what we don't know about all of her legal documents. So it's a little hard for me to be able to tell you that. My understanding is that Joe Ryan had a life insurance policy and that Tylee was the beneficiary. It is not unusual when people divorce for non-custodial parents or parents who owe a duty of support to their children to be directed to maintain a life insurance policy that would help support the child should they die before their support obligation is fulfilled, before the child reaches 18. So Joe Ryan had a life insurance policy. Tylee was the beneficiary. That was inherited. My understanding is that when Lori, so in addition to that life insurance policy, Tylee also received Social Security benefits as a surviving child of Joe Ryan. So my understanding is that those benefits went into an account in Tylee's name that Lori was also signer on because she was a minor. And that Lori, after she moved to Rexburg, but before Tylee went missing, took control over that account and moved that money into her own account. Now, we do not know at this point how much money there was in that account. Lori was, and I'm sure Tylee had similar habits. Lori was pretty free with spending money, and it makes me wonder whether there was much money left of Joe's insurance money, but we don't know for sure. That may come out as time goes on, but for now, we don't know. Thank you, Lisa Galindo. That's a very generous super sticker to be sent to Michelle, and I'm certain that Michelle appreciates it. If Chad doesn't get a plea deal, what will be his lawyer's approach to the case? Well, I think that that John Pryor has telegraphed all along his strategy on the case. And that is that Chad had nothing to do with the murders, that this was all Lori and her hitman, Alex Cox, who is her brother, and that he simply was deceived by a pretty face. And how he gets through Tammy's murder, that's a different story. He was home when Tammy died. So that one is a little bit harder to parse out. But I think that his defense when it comes to the deaths of Tylee and JJ is going to be Chad wasn't around when it happened. He didn't know what was going on. He had no idea. So I think as it applies to Tammy, he is going to continue to say she died of natural causes, perhaps exacerbated by medication she was taking, and that he was not responsible. So, but I do think that you are going to see a completely different approach, because I think you're going to see Chad and his attorney very firmly throw Lori and Alex under the bus. Not sure it's going to be enough to save him, but I think that's what we're going to see. we've been chatting for over an hour now, so if you've got any last questions, please feel free to post them. And also, if you have questions that you're not comfortable posting in the chat, you are welcome to post them in the show notes or in the chat having to do on YouTube. And please also feel free to email them directly to me. I do know I got several emails from folks pointing out that I had a typo in my newsletter when I had said that Lori had presented mental health information at trial, when what I meant to say was that she had not. So I apologize. I was zooming through that pretty quick to try and get it out ahead of sentencing yesterday, so everybody have a chance to see and learn a little bit more about sentencing. Now, Arizona does not have indeterminate sentencing. So if Lori is convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, for Charles and for Brandon, the mandatory sentence is life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. So the only question will be guilty or not guilty there. If she is guilty, there will be no discretion for the court in their sentencing. So I want to thank everybody for being here. It was fun to hop on with you all right after the sentencing. Looks like we have over 600 people in chat, so thanks for joining us. Thanks for helping us process this, the information we got today. I'm going to invite you to join me on Wednesday at the usual time, 6 Pacific, to talk about all things true crime. We will bring you any additional information that comes up between now and then having to do with Lori's sentencing or any other developments in the Daybell case, as well as looking at some other true crime cases and what's been happening in the last few weeks with them. So please join us then. Until then, please, I see somebody in the chat say they didn't get the newsletter. You can find that at thelorivallowsstory.com, and it will be in the archives. So for anybody who may have missed that, and be sure and check your spam folder. So thanks a lot for joining us, everyone. I appreciate it. Thank you for all of your generosity to Michelle, and we will see you on Wednesday. Have a great day.